The rain was a million tiny knives cutting my face as I knelt in the gravel. This wasn't the clean rain of the Upper East Side. This was the acid wash of the Hudson rail yard, smelling of rust and spilled oil. The train horn screamed, a sound that didn't just warn you, it judged you. It was a block away, a churning black mouth swallowing the light. My gloves were already soaked through, hands slick as I fumbled with the knots biting into the man's wrists. He was tied to the tracks, a silent, bleeding sacrifice. "Mateo, the light!" I yelled. My 10-year-old nephew, Mateo, our lookout, was supposed to keep the single beam focused on the rope, but he slipped on a slick rail tie. Our cheap hardware store flashlight flew up, hit a single box, and shattered. Darkness slammed down, total and deafening, punctuated only by the metallic thunder of the freight train that was now on us, its headlight blooming into a blinding, white eye. My fingers were working blind, the knot refusing to break. Then 3 tiny crimson dots bloomed on the wet steel beside the man's head. Red laser scopes. They didn't drift. They were solid, locked on. This wasn't some random street crime. This was professional. Someone was watching, patiently waiting for the train to do the dirty work or for us to step into the line of fire. I flattened myself, pulling the blade across the binding, knowing the next glint of metal could be the end of us. The air warped with the heat and pressure of the engine. The rip in the night. The moment that tore my life into before and after. Just as I felt the engine's draft whip my hair, the man on the tracks lifted his head. He ignored the train, ignored the red scopes, and looked directly into my eyes. His voice was a rasp, intimate, and full of a terrible recognition, like a secret prayer. Elena. My heart stopped. The world went silent beneath the train's scream. Luca Vitali, the ghost. The man whose picture I'd only seen in cold case files, the silent force people whispered about in the city's shadows. The same stranger who, 5 years ago, paid the crippling hospital bill for the little girl I couldn't save and vanished without a trace. The man people feared, now completely helpless. I knew those eyes. I chose. I cut the final rope, a clean snap. I didn't save a stranger. I saved a phantom who knew my name. The rails sang under my knees. The city, high above the yards, held its breath. If you're still with me, if the pulse in your neck is beating just a little too fast, hit subscribe. Because this is the night everything I thought I knew about medicine, crime, and trust burned down to smoke. You don't want to miss the next drop.
The train didn't just pass. It tore the darkness in two. It felt less like a vehicle and more like a massive, howling wave of sound and pressure. The blast of heat slammed my back, stealing my breath. Gravel and track ballast spat up, stinging my scalp and digging into my hair like angry insects. I could smell the hot, working metal of the brakes and the stale water trapped in the ties. But under the raw smells of the yard, I caught something else. The sharp, metallic tang of fresh blood and the clean, expensive scent of cedar and smoke that clung to Luca Vitale. I didn't look up. My focus was a razor edge. I was still flat on my stomach, hands working by muscle memory. I was a doctor, and even here, in the dirt, under fire, I was still responding to a crisis. Adrenaline was a clean shot in my veins. The final knot was cut, but he wasn't free yet. The force of the train was whipping his clothes and hair. "Mateo, on my count, grab his other shoulder," I yelled, my voice weak against the dying roar of the engine. Mateo, bless his 10-year-old heart, was shaking but solid. He scrambled to Luca's left side, his small, tough hands bracing the man's shoulder. Luca was heavy, pure, dead weight of muscle and bone. Now, we dragged. The friction of the grit tore the skin on my palms through the wet glove leather. My hands were slick with rain and whatever blood he'd lost from the cuts on his wrists. The horn screamed its final, fading challenge. The engine's shadow was replaced by the blur of boxcars, a continuous rattling wall of iron. We pulled. We rolled him clear just as the last car screamed past. The sheer, overwhelming thunder stopped. The silence that followed didn't feel empty, it felt like a punch. A sharp, stinging silence that made the distant ringing in my ears loud. And in that silence, I smelled my own fear, cold sweat mixed with rain, and that distinct, expensive cologne that clung to Luca Vitale. I looked down, seeing him truly for the first time outside of old police surveillance photos. He wasn't a monster. He was a man in an impeccably tailored black suit that was now ruined by rail yard filth. His face was sharp, intelligent, and exhausted. He looked at me with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was the way a man looks at a choice he didn't deserve, a miracle he hadn't paid for. It was not gratitude. It was a devastating kind of realization.
"We have to move," I whispered, pulling myself up, my knees aching from the pressure on the rough gravel. "Gunfire!" Matteo hissed, his voice cracking, pointing toward the south end of the yard where the signal box was still chipped from the rounds that narrowly missed us. The echoes were dying, but they were already replaced by the sound of approaching men. Shouts bounced off the walls of the parked freight cars. They knew we were alive. We ran. This was my city, but it was his playground. We weren't running through streets I knew, but through a maze of static steel. We ducked between two massive faded blue tankers marked CSX Freight, our feet crunching on the oil-soaked ballast. Luca was favoring his left leg, and I kept a hand braced on his back, guiding him, pushing him. Matteo, small and fast, stayed low. He was a natural runner. He was the reason I started practicing parkour on the weekends just to keep up with him. Tonight, that practice might have saved our lives. The shouts were getting closer, closer than they should have been. They weren't running, they were closing a grid. "Which way, Luca?" I panted, throwing a glance over my shoulder. "The A block," he rasped, pointing a bloodied hand toward a cluster of 3 tiered car carriers. "There's a maintenance road just past it. The car is waiting." When we reached his idling sedan, it was a black, nondescript Mercedes S-Class, the kind of car that blends into the background of any major city. Relief flooded me, sharp and sudden, but it lasted exactly 3 seconds. The driver was slumped over the wheel. I didn't need to check. The way his head was resting against the steering column, the dark, slow-moving stains soaking into the white fabric of his collar, it was a single, clean shot through the back of the head. An execution, surgical and quiet. The engine was running, the heat on high, but the man was cold. He never heard the train. "Get in the back, Matteo. Get low," I ordered, my voice flat, professional. I pulled the driver's door open and checked the console. The keys were in the ignition. No time to mourn, no time to think. This wasn't my world. In my world, death was a tragedy you fought against with sterile tools and clean protocols. Here, it was a note left on the dashboard. Luca slid into the back seat beside Matteo, his face etched with grim acceptance. He didn't look shocked, he looked disappointed. I climbed into the driver's seat, my hands on the wheel, my feet instantly finding the pedals. I was a terrible driver, but tonight I'd be a fast one. I shifted the car into drive and stomped the accelerator. The tires squealed on the wet asphalt of the maintenance road, a sound that finally masked the pounding of my heart. We flew out of the rail yard, the high chain-link fence blurring as we passed. I didn't care about traffic laws. I cared about distance. "Where are we going?" I shouted over the wind, rushing through the small gap where the driver's window was cracked. Luca didn't answer right away. He just stared out the window at the flashing lights of a distant police cruiser, lights that were probably looking for us. He closed his eyes, then opened them, and the exhaustion was replaced by something cold and absolute. He leaned forward, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that cut through the engine noise like a blade. "My brother did this." The silence in the car was immediate and heavy. I didn't need to ask which brother. His tone made it clear this wasn't about a minor sibling rivalry. This was a war. And then a second set of headlights appeared suddenly in my rearview mirror. Too close, too fast. They weren't police. I knew the look of an aggressor car. They were gaining.
The shadows of the city answered Luca's devastating accusation with footsteps closing in. I drove like a frantic tourist, using the crisscrossing maze of the city's old financial district to shake the tail. Luca gave me directions in short, clipped commands. Left here, quick, then straight onto the FDR, southbound. It was a high-stakes scavenger hunt, and the prize was not going to jail, or worse. The car was fast, heavy, and handled the wet curves of the highway like it was glued to the asphalt. Whoever was behind us eventually lost the game of chicken with the late-night traffic and faded back. We exited into the quiet, upscale streets of Tribeca, finally pulling into an underground garage that looked more like a gallery than a parking lot. It was clean, brightly lit, and empty, the kind of place where dust was an insult. The building above us was called the Azure, one of the most exclusive residential towers in the city.
Luca's penthouse was everything a man in his position was rumored to own, a cathedral of marble and silent, unquestioning money. The air smelled filtered, expensive, and absolutely sterile. It was the highest floor, floor-to-ceiling glass wrapping around the entire apartment, offering a devastating panoramic view of Manhattan and the East River. The river below us was an obsidian ribbon, folding the city's light into itself, 1,000 distorted golds and electric blues. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly detached from the dirt and blood we'd just escaped. My first priority was Matteo. He was pale, but trying hard to be a tough guy. "I'm good, Alina," he insisted, pulling the ruined leather jacket off his shoulders. I took Luca's heavy, cashmere-lined jacket, the one that smelled of cedar and smoke, and wrapped it around him. It was 3 sizes too big, swallowing his small frame whole, but the lining was warm. I settled him on an absurdly large white leather sofa with a glass of milk and the remote control. Luca had switched on a silent foreign news channel on the massive flat screen. Matteo was asleep within minutes, the soft thump-thump of his steady heart a temporary anchor for mine. Then Luca. His wrists were deep lacerated, the rope acting like a tourniquet and a knife all at once. I washed my hands, scrubbing until the rail yard grit was gone, and pulled out the small zippered trauma kit I always carried in my messenger bag. It was the only part of my old life as an emergency room doctor I still allowed myself to hold on to. "Sit," I ordered, gesturing to a sleek black chair near a minimalist fireplace that housed a silent, decorative flame. He obeyed without question. I worked quickly, sterilizing the wounds, the alcohol stinging the raw flesh. He didn't flinch. I ran a thread, pulling the skin together, 12 neat, small bites on skin that was already a tapestry of old scars. The marks were not fresh. They were old stories I didn't have the right to read. His body was a monument to old violence. As I finished, pulling the sterile tape across the sutures, I finally asked the question that had been burning since the rail yard. "Who wants you dead, Luca?" He stared out at the dark, silent city, his profile sharp against the glowing backdrop. He looked less like a gangster and more like a ruined king. "The obvious answer is everyone," he said, his voice quiet, almost rusty. He walked over to a wet bar and poured a glass of clear, filtered water, but set it down without drinking. He was too tightly wound for hydration. "The truthful answer, Alina? Family." "Your brother?" I asked, nodding the final suture. He nodded, turning back to face me, his eyes holding the immense weight of the city outside. "Enzo. He calls it unburdening the legacy. I call it greed mixed with a bad case of morality." "And you let him tie you to a rail track?" "It was a statement," he countered, a ghost of a bitter smile on his lips. "It was meant to look like an internal cleanup, messy and final. He knew you'd been watching the rail yard. He saw a 2-for-1 opportunity. You're a inconvenient problem for him." I finished taping the final bandage. "I'm not his problem. I'm a former doctor who lost her license for reporting hospital malpractice." "That's where our worlds connect, Dr. Reyes," he said,
walking to a hidden panel in the wall that slid open with a whisper of hydraulics. Inside, there was a bank of screens and a meticulously organized safe. He pulled out a dark blue folder and handed it to me. Read. The folder was heavy, filled with documents, spreadsheets, and printed emails, shell companies linked to construction firms, kickbacks from medical supply contracts, a network of offshore accounts. It was a complete financial map of systemic, high-level corruption, and at the very top of a critical spreadsheet, I saw a familiar name. Dr. Arthur Vance, the former director of the St. Jude's Charity Foundation, the man who had actively worked to dismantle my name and career when I tried to expose the board's fraud 2 years ago. The rot I had tried to cut out was exactly the same rot Lucas' folder mapped. My anger, which had been a low simmer of injustice, became a cold, steady, and dangerously focused thing. He linked our worlds, Lucas said, watching my face as I absorbed the sickening truth. My family controls the supply chain, the real estate. They control the flow of money. Your friends, the philanthropists like Vance, they control the demand, the hospitals, and the charities. Enzo wants it all, clean and corporate. I looked up from the folder, meeting his gaze. Why tell me? Why give me this? His eyes softened slightly as they drifted over to Matteo, asleep and safe on the couch. Luca's expression was the first truly human thing I had seen in him. Loyalty sat on him like expensive armor, heavy and essential, but also like a profound guilt. He was a man steeped in darkness who couldn't bear the thought of contaminating a child's sleep. I need to live to fight him, but if I don't, I want someone outside the game to have the truth. You, Dr. Reyes, are the one person he underestimated. Just as I was about to formulate my next question, who is protecting you? An alert flashed across the largest central screen on the wall. It wasn't loud, just a silent, urgent crimson notification. Security breach. Private elevator descending. Code V7. Luca crossed the room in 2 strides. His exhaustion completely vanished. He tapped a sequence, and a mirrored feed popped up in the corner of the screen, showing the inside of the elevator. The camera was hidden, angled discreetly. The face in the mirrored reflection was perfect. A sharp jaw, a neat smile, and eyes that held the promise of deep-sea cold. Enzo Vitale. The elevator doors whispered open, a sound too soft for the man who stepped out. Enzo Vitale looked like he didn't just own the sky. He looked like he was auditioning to play God in it. He wore a suit the color of midnight, tailored so perfectly it looked painted on. His smile was precise, clean as winter light, and completely empty of warmth. He looked less like Luca's brother and more like his pristine, calculated opposite. I stepped immediately in front of Luca, putting my body between the threat and the patient. Enzo's eyes slid over me, a dismissive, almost clinical assessment of my dirt-stained clothes and rain-matted hair. Dr. Reyes, he said, the name rolling off his tongue like a joke only he heard. He walked past me, his expensive leather shoes silent on the polished marble. I apologize for the late-night intrusion, but family matters, and my brother, he paused, gesturing to Luca with a casual wave of his hand, has a tendency to overcomplicate things. Luca moved to a position of quiet defense, his hands visible and relaxed, a predator choosing not to spring. Enzo, the message was clear. You didn't need to bring the cavalry. Enzo glanced at the wall of screens, noticing the security breach alert that was still blinking red. Always the drama, Luca. I only brought a few concerned employees. They worry about your erratic choices. Then he turned his full attention back to me, and the perfect smile intensified, making my skin crawl. He took a single, slow step closer and raised his hand, intending to offer a formal European air kiss near my cheek. I didn't flinch. I just held his gaze, an immovable block of tired, cold fury. He paused, his hand hanging in the air for a tense second before he let it drop, adjusting his cufflink. The scent of his cologne, sharp, metallic, like polished silver, sat wrong in my throat, a contrast to Luca's warm cedar. "You should really consider your company, Doctor." Enzo continued, his voice silky. "Luca carries ghosts, heavy ones. They drag everyone around him down." He then focused on his brother, the professional mask slipping just enough to reveal a sliver of genuine, cold impatience. "The offer stands, Luca. No one needs to die tonight. Step down, live quiet, take a generous severance package, and leave the city. Let the business breathe." He used the word business with the soft reverence one usually reserved for salvation. He wanted the empire, and he wanted it clean. Luca merely shook his head, a single, decisive movement. "I stopped breathing for you a long time ago, Enzo." Matteo chose that moment to wake up. He stirred on the couch, rubbing his eyes, the massive suit jacket slipping off his small shoulders. He sat up and stared at the impeccably dressed stranger. Enzo's gaze, which had been locked onto Luca, drifted. It lingered on Matteo, not just a glance, but a deep, calculating inspection that lasted a second too long. In that flash, the perfect man became truly unsettling. There was no warmth, no condescension, just assessment. Asset? Liability? My entire body locked up. I took another step to shield Matteo. This time, Luca's hand rose, a small, two-fingered gesture, a silent command I didn't understand. From the dark, shadowed edges of the penthouse, from behind pillars and through a discreet service doorway, men appeared. They didn't rush, they materialized. There were 6 of them. Quiet and well-built, their posture alone a threat. They weren't holding guns. They didn't need to. Their presence was the weapon. They were Luca's old guard, and they stood waiting. Enzo's smile didn't drop. It just tightened, acknowledging the move. He was outnumbered, but he was far from defeated. "Always the theater, brother," Enzo murmured. He looked at the guards, then back at Luca, and finally at me. He walked to the elevator, smoothing his jacket. "I love you, Luca. Don't mistake this for anything else." The love in his voice tasted like poison. "You have until dawn. If you're still here, I'll assume you've chosen the hard way." The doors sealed and Enzo was gone. The tension in the room remained, hanging in the air like ozone after a lightning strike. The 6 silent men melted back into the shadows they'd emerged from. I turned to Luca, my hands on my hips, my anger finally finding its voice. "You let him walk? He just tried to have you killed, and he's going to try again." "Patience, Elena," Luca said, stepping closer to a heavy, antique mahogany desk, a piece that looked out of place among the modern glass and steel. He opened a drawer in the desk. It wasn't a weapons drawer. It was filled with elegant writing paper, a heavy fountain pen, and a small, nondescript USB drive, the size of a thumb. He slid the drive across the polished wood toward me. It stopped right at the edge, a tiny piece of black plastic holding the weight of the world. "You asked why I gave you the folder. Because you're the lever. Enzo knows the truth about the hospital kickbacks will ruin him publicly, but it won't destroy me. I can survive the scandal. He can't.
His whole identity is built on his image as the corporate philanthropist. This clears your name, Elena, Luca whispered, his eyes dark with the seriousness of his promise. Every email, every falsified signature, every lie they told to ruin you, it's all here, but we have to live to morning to use it. I spent the next 2 hours in a silent corner of the penthouse, hunched over Luca's personal laptop. Matteo was still asleep on the sofa, clutching the cashmere jacket like a security blanket. Luca was on the phone, his back to me, speaking quietly in a rapid-fire mix of Italian and English, his voice like sandpaper on steel. He was mobilizing, giving coded instructions. He was a general preparing for the final battle, but I was focused on the tiny, glowing drive in my hand. I plugged it in. The file was exactly what he promised, a spine of evidence. It was a meticulous, cross-referenced log of my downfall. There were emails detailing meetings between Dr. Vance, the former charity director, and one of Luca's own shell companies. Deposits funneled through layers of foreign banks, a tightly edited timetable that mapped every step of my ousting from St. Jude's, from the planted evidence in my digital files to the conveniently scheduled disciplinary hearing that had zero chance of fairness. I read the emails. I saw the tight, satisfied smiles in my memory, the way the boardroom smelled like old lemon polish and fresh, clean lies when I was escorted out. I remembered the cold signatures on the termination letter, each one a nail in the coffin of my career. I felt the slow burn of 2 years of grinding, righteous indignation. It wasn't a flare of temper that hit me. It was a cold, pure rage. A clean, bright fire that burned away every doubt I'd ever had. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had meticulously, deliberately destroyed me to cover their tracks. They used me as a sacrifice to protect their racket. The truth was better than any medicine. I closed the file, my hands steady now. "Does it help?" Luca asked, turning from the glass, having just ended a call. "It's everything," I admitted, rubbing my tired eyes. "It connects Vance and the board directly to your family's money. It proves the charity was just a funnel for kickbacks. It proves I told the truth." He came closer, leaning against the marble counter that separated the kitchen from the living space. "Good. Now, you need to understand the man you're saving." He opened another smaller leather-bound book, a physical ledger that looked entirely out of place in the penthouse digital. It was filled with names and dates, written in the beautiful, looping cursive of a man who still believed in paper. "This is not a list of accounts," he said, tapping a page. "It's a ledger of debt, the kind that isn't paid in money." He read a few entries. Roof replacement, Sanchez family, Sunset Park. Funeral expenses, Officer K. Riley, Staten Island. School uniforms, 4 kids, Crown Heights. My family, the Vitali legacy, has always been about leverage. We pay for roofs, funerals, school uniforms. We are the quiet help when the system fails. But it's not charity, Elena. It's debt. It means when I call, they answer. It means their conscience is mine to direct. I looked at the pages of small, genuine kindnesses, mixed with the chilling transactional nature of it all. It was the best and worst of humanity, bound in leather. I heard the apology he wouldn't give himself, the quiet justification for a life lived on the dark side. He built an empire on crime, but he used some of the spoils to be the last resort for those the city broke. The little girl whose bill you paid 5 years ago, did you call that debt in?" Luca met my gaze, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "Never. That was penance, not leverage. A debt I owe to myself." A comfortable silence settled between us, broken only by the gentle hush of the air conditioning. Matteo walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass wall. He stood there, small and resilient,
watching a tugboat drag a chain of yellow and red lights across the dark water of the river. He was safe, and for the first time in years, so was I. I walked up behind him, placing my hands lightly on his shoulders. "We're not running this time, Maddie," I promised him, the words as much for myself as for him. "We have the truth. We fight." He leaned back into my touch and simply nodded. The moment of peace broke like cheap glass. The immense penthouse went dark. It wasn't a flicker. It was an absolute instant cutoff. The emergency track lights overhead didn't even catch, suggesting the power wasn't just cut, it was deadened. The city outside, however, remained an ocean of blazing light, making our apartment feel like a black hole sucking in the immense light of Lower Manhattan. And then, in the abrupt, suffocating silence, a faint mechanical click. It came from the service door near the kitchen, the same door the guards had emerged from. A low, quiet sound that signaled a lock was disengaged. Someone wasn't waiting for the elevator. They were already inside the building. The darkness was immediate, total, and terrifying. The only light came from the city outside, which cast the apartment in a sickly, pulsating grid of distant street lamps and advertising displays. The emergency lights, usually a reliable backup, were silent, a heavy confirming clue that the power wasn't just out, it had been expertly suppressed. I smelled the metallic burn of ozone and the thin plastic sting of a sophisticated jammer. Enzo wasn't playing chess anymore. He was sending a cleanup crew. Luca didn't panic. He was galvanized. "Elevators jammed. Doors are sealed," he murmured, his voice low and tactical. "We're on the service stairwell access." That click meant a bypass was engaged. I grabbed the medkit from the floor, my mind snapping back into ER triage mode. Move, assess, control. Mateo was awake, his small face illuminated by the eerie red wash of the city's lights reflecting off the ceiling. He was silent, wide-eyed, taking his cue from us. "Mateo, stick to my side," I instructed, my voice a breathy command. I placed him behind the solid marble island counter, positioning my body between him and the service door. Luca moved with the economy of a man who knows exactly where all the angles are. Muscle memory guided him to a hidden alcove near the kitchen, where he retrieved something. A simple, heavy steel baton, not a gun. He was moving on muscle and memory. A figure slid through the service door. It was one of Luca's men, the one who had been standing guard by the window just minutes ago. His eyes were wide, panicked, and fixed on something behind him. He opened his mouth to deliver a warning, a desperate, gasping sound. He never finished the word. A second man followed, moving with ruthless silence. This man wasn't wearing Luca's colors. He was massive, dressed in black tactical gear, and he moved like a shadow given physical form. He didn't use a knife or a gun. He used a precise, brutal chokehold, snapping the neck of Luca's guard instantly. The body dropped with a dull thud onto the floor, the final warning silenced before it was uttered. They knew the apartment's layout. They knew the weak points. "Mateo, run!" I screamed, shoving him hard toward the main living area. Luca reacted instantly. He was closer to the centerpiece of the room, a massive, antique grand piano, a beautiful anomaly in the minimalist space. It was a solid piece of mahogany, a relic. He didn't try to fight the intruder head-on. He lunged for the piano, slamming the heavy lid shut and using the massive wooden curve as an impromptu heavy shield. The attacker, silent and trained, anticipated the move and changed his trajectory. He slammed his body into the piano. Wood splintered with the force of the impact, and the tension of the strings, suddenly and brutally disturbed, caused two keys to cry out, a jarring, high-pitched clang that was immediately cut off. Luca was using the chaos. "Stairwell, now!" We didn't hesitate. Luca grabbed the man's fallen baton and swung low, buying us a precious second. I sprinted, pulling Matteo by the arm, past the expensive furniture, and toward a steel door I hadn't noticed before, hidden flush against a paneled wall. I knew the service shaft was there. Luca rammed his shoulder into the door, and we poured into the stairwell. It was cold, smelling of stale dust and concrete. The air shaft was an echo chamber, and our ragged breath was white in the cold air. We pushed hard, taking the steps 2 at a time, moving down. Enzo's men knew we'd run to the exit, but the service elevator was sealed, and the main elevators were a death trap. We were aiming for the 20th floor, the nearest point of access to an adjacent, older building where we could potentially jump across a maintenance catwalk. We were halfway between the 35th and 20th floors when it happened. My phone, which I had forgotten about in the chaos, buzzed violently in the thigh pocket of my rain-soaked jeans. The sound, muffled but loud in the confined space, was a shock. Instantly, Luca pulled me against the cold concrete wall, his body covering mine, his eyes scanning the space above and below us.
I fumbled for the device, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was an unknown number, a disposable burner phone. Against every instinct, I answered it. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice rough. The voice on the other end was quiet, rushed, and instantly, devastatingly familiar. It was a voice I had prayed to hear for 2 years, and one I had also tried to forget. "Elena? Thank God. It's Sarah." Sarah, the lead scrub nurse from the oncology wing at St. Jude's. The one who had tried to warn me a year ago, whispering that the numbers didn't add up, that the board was cooking the books. The one who was fired and blacklisted a week later for disrupting operations. "Elena, you're walking right into their mouth. They're expecting you to run, not fight. You have to get out of that building." The warning was a jarring counterpoint to the rush of adrenaline. I paused on the 20th floor landing, the cold concrete pressing against my back, the weight of Luca and Matteo beside me. "What is it, Sarah? What are they doing?" She didn't answer right away, only a sharp, choked breath. "The gala, tomorrow night, the whole board, Enzo's people, the donors, they're holding a vote to rubber stamp the new construction contract. That vote locks the kickbacks in stone. If they sign off on it, there's no turning back." A rush of cold, painful hope surged through me, overpowering the fear. If they were meeting, they were vulnerable. "But, Elena," Sarah continued, her voice dropping to a near-panicked whisper, "there's a file in the oncology wing's safe, the old one. It contains enough evidence to gut the whole board, not just the kickbacks. It's the original paperwork. If daylight hits it, the whole thing folds." I could hear the fear, but also the clean, bright resolve in her voice. My own chest tightened. The oncology safe. I knew the combination from a training course I was never allowed to finish. We had the drive, but she was offering the original sin. I kept the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the static hiss and Sarah's shallow breathing. The stairwell was freezing, but the news was heating my blood. The gala, St. Jude's Hospital, the heart of the conspiracy, dressed up in silk and champagne. It was the perfect, terrible stage. "Sarah, where are you now?" I asked, needing to know she was safe. "Doesn't matter," she cut in, rushed. "I'm out. I'm just trying to pay the debt I owe you, Elena. You tried to protect me. I owe you this chance." She paused. "They're voting at 10 p.m. sharp. Get the file. Be there." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone. The unknown number had vanished. Luca watched my face, reading the shift from sheer terror to focused, dangerous clarity. He didn't ask what was said. He asked what we were going to do. "We stop running," I said, putting the phone away. "There's a gala tomorrow night. Enzo's trying to push through a final vote on the hospital kickbacks. The whole board will be there." Then the line went dead.
I stared at the phone. The unknown number had vanished. Luca watched my face, reading the shift from sheer terror to focused, dangerous clarity. He didn't ask what was said. He asked what we were going to do. "We stop running," I said, putting the phone away. "There's a gala tomorrow night. Enzo's trying to push through a final vote on the hospital kickbacks. The whole board will be there." I relayed Sarah's message about the file, the original documents, in the old oncology wing safe, the safe I had the code for. "We have his digital evidence," I said, holding up the small USB drive. "But the paper in that safe, the original signatures and transfers, that's the clean kill." Luca nodded once, a gesture of absolute understanding. His mind was already moving, calculating angles. "Enzo wants me dead tonight so he can walk into that gala tomorrow as the unchallenged heir, the one who cleaned up the mess. If we show up, we ruin his narrative. We turn his victory lap into a public execution." He stood for a moment, thinking, his profile dark and sharp against the concrete. "It's the only way. If we use the drive now, he'll spin it. If we present the hard proof at the moment he takes the stage, he falls." Matteo, sensing the shift in mood, stepped forward, his eyes bright with a sudden childlike thrill. "We're going to break into the hospital?" "We're going to collect evidence," I corrected gently, though the plan felt a lot like theft and medicine at the same time. The goal was to heal the institution by surgically removing the rot. We retraced our steps, pushing back up the stairwell. Luca had already given his men enough time to confuse the attackers. We reached his penthouse floor and stepped back inside. The darkness was still heavy, but the absence of immediate pursuit told me the threat had been temporarily neutralized. We worked fast. Luca made more calls, arranging for a secure place to drop off Matteo until the next morning. I rummaged through the ruined apartment, finding a formal black suit of Luca's that would fit Matteo well enough for the drop-off, and gathering a few tools from the kitchen. Small, sharp things that could pick a lock or stitch a wound. "We need to blend in," Luca said, his eyes scanning the large walk-in closet. He pulled out a charcoal gray tuxedo for himself, and for me, a beautiful, liquid silk black evening dress that looked like it cost more than my first car. "You're going as my date, Elena, the grieving sister of the disgraced Dr. Reyes." "I am Dr. Reyes," I reminded him, pulling this stunning dress over my head. It felt alien and wrong, but it was perfect camouflage. "Tomorrow night, you're the distraction," he countered, lacing up his shoes. We were making the final preparations, the adrenaline-fueled riot of the room broken only by the click of the cabinet door, when the glass wall over the river bloomed with light. It was a slow, majestic, and terrifying display, not the chaotic, frantic lights of a patrol car, but a deliberate, focused gathering of authority. The river outside was suddenly bathed in intense police blue. They weren't here for us. The lights were focused down on the street, 20 stories below. We watched, transfixed, as a series of heavy, black, armored SUVs, a convoy, pulled up to the entrance of the Azure. The blue lights of the police cars served only one purpose: to escort the convoy through the city. The vehicle that pulled up last was unmistakable: a massive, custom-built black Cadillac Escalade, the kind that screams untouchable wealth. As the police formed a perimeter, Enzo Vitale stepped out, adjusting his coat in the rain. He wasn't running. He was being protected. Luca stood next to me, his breath catching in his throat. "He's not just coming to the gala," Luca whispered, his voice tight. "He's making an entrance. He's inviting the police to stand guard. He's telling the world he owns the city, and tomorrow night, he expects the whole city to bow." The St. Jude's annual Gala of Hope wasn't a party. It was a demonstration of power. It was held in the hospital's newest wing, all blinding glass and polished gold. The air shimmered with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. Waiters moved with silent, balletic precision, offering champagne and canapes that tasted like abstract art. Every camera was angled to make mercy look expensive, to frame the donors as saints bathed in soft cathedral-like light. It was a golden trap, and we were walking straight into the velvet jaws. I felt every eye on us. In the borrowed, liquid silk dress, I felt less like myself and more like an extension of Luca's silent power. The dress smelled like jasmine and someone else's past, a past I was determined to erase. Luca's hand rested lightly on the small of my back, a silent, possessive anchor. The whispers followed us, his name a low, sibilant hum. Vitale, the black sheep returning to the fold. But their questions were directed at me. Who is she? The new lawyer? The silent partner? The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. I was the disgraced doctor returning to the scene of my professional execution, draped over the arm of the city's most notorious shadow figure. We navigated the crowds, board members with smiles tight as drumskins, rival contractors smelling opportunity, and the same well-fed philanthropists who had signed my termination letter. Chairman Howard Rourke, the man who presided over the board, found us first. He smiled like a banker in a holy place, his handshake a damp, chilly formality. "Luca, so glad to see you well," Rourke oozed, his eyes flicking to the faint bandages beneath Luca's crisp cuff. "A little late-night trouble, I hear. The city is so rough these days." "Just a slight misunderstanding, Howard," Luca replied, his voice calm, heavy with unspoken threat. "The rough parts of the city sometimes come to clean up the smooth ones. Elena here is a friend. She appreciates the importance of transparency." Rourke's smile twitched, sensing the tension, and he swiftly moved on. Luca leaned in, speaking into my ear. "The oncology wing is behind the stage. Old service entrance. The safe is the third door on the right." The music swelled, a complicated string arrangement designed to make people feel rich and important. We slipped away from the main hall, moving down a low-ceilinged corridor reserved for catering and technicians. The air immediately smelled like grease and industrial cleaner. This was the real hospital, the back of the house. The service door was unlocked, as Sarah promised, leading into a dark, quiet hall. This was the old, original part of St. Jude's, built in the 60s, where the ceilings were lower and the tile felt cold underfoot. Third door on the right. The room was a cramped, disused storage space for medical records. The light switch didn't work. I used the flashlight on my phone, illuminating the back wall. There it was, a heavy, black safe bolted deep into the concrete. It was the same model I'd been trained on years ago, an old Century 4500. Reliable, but not digital. My hands, usually clumsy and unsure outside the operating room, felt clean and precise. I knelt down, the silk dress pooling around me, and placed my ear against the cold steel. The code was not a sequence of numbers. It was a date, the hospital's founding day. I remembered the rhythm, the slight stiffness of the tumblers. Click, 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 grind. My breath hitched. The tumblers fell into place with a definitive mechanical thunk. The heavy door swung open, revealing a dark interior smelling faintly of dust and old paper. Inside, nestled beneath several bulky administrative binders, was the file. It was a thin, manila envelope, unmarked, unassuming. It contained the original signature pages for the first St. Jude's charity land acquisition, the one that started the entire kickback loop, with the initial forged documents. The paper felt fragile, but the weight of the evidence was staggering. This wasn't a clean, easily dismissed digital file. This was the body, delivered by a nurse who found her conscience. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling slightly with the rush of triumph. I had it. It was done. I stood up, turning back toward the doorway, ready to run, ready to end this now. And then the light, which had been only my phone beam, was interrupted. A man-shaped shadow filled the doorway, cutting off the dim light from the hallway. Enzo Vitali was waiting. He wasn't holding a gun. He was just standing there, clapping softly, the sound flat and echoing in the cramped space. His tuxedo was immaculate, his face lit by the eerie white of my phone screen. Bravo, Dr. Reyes. Always the scavenger. Always looking for what doesn't belong to you. The pistol in his pocket wasn't visible, but I could smell the faint, metallic scent of the oil on the weapon. It was a rumor I could smell, and it was enough. The storage room suddenly felt like the smallest, coldest cell in the city. I kept the manila file clutched in my hand, raising the flashlight to hold Enzo in its beam. His smile remained, perfect and undisturbed, but his eyes were sharp with controlled malice. "We need to talk, Doctor," he said, stepping fully into the room, the door clicking shut behind him. The music from the gala was now a distant, muffled beat under the floor, a drum beat to our negotiation. We were in the service hall, the utilitarian corridor that fed the gala. Enzo didn't shout, he talked as if we were discussing interest rates. He talked about family. Luca carries the weight of the last century. The old ways, the dirt, the blood, the misplaced loyalty. He can't evolve. He's a ghost and he's dragging you and that boy down with him. He paused, letting the implication hang heavy. Men like me, Elena, we need lighter hands, cleaner balance sheets. I want this organization, both my family's and this hospital, to be run like a corporation, efficient, profitable, not some messy, emotional kingdom. He walked closer, his step confident. "I know everything Luca has given you. The drive. I already have a full pre-written rebuttal in the press. He's easy to dismiss, a discredited, vindictive lunatic. But you have a future." Enzo leaned against a shelf filled with sterile bedsheets. He smelled of mint and a faint, cold winter air. It was a pleasant scent that contrasted sickeningly with the poison he was offering. "I can reinstate your license. Not tomorrow, but soon. I can give you a board seat, a seat with real authority where you can oversee the charity budget and prevent mishaps. All you have to do is leave that folder on the shelf and choose stability. Choose the new world." I looked down at the file in my hand. He was offering everything I had lost, my career, my name, my honor. He was offering it wrapped in a lie, paid for with the lives of people the hospital board had bled dry. I thought of the hundreds of mothers and fathers I'd treated in the emergency room, their faces etched with fear and poverty. I thought of the one mother who cried, watching her daughter finally breathe free, while a man with Luca's eyes paid the bill. Luca's methods were dark, but his core intent was salvage. Enzo's intent was total consumption. "The stability you offer, Enzo," I said, my voice cutting the air like glass, "is bought with the suffering of patients who can't pay your exorbitant rates. It's built on a foundation of fraud and kickbacks that costs lives. It's not stability, it's a gilded cage." I raised the manila file, "And I don't leave this on a shelf. I put it on the front page. Enzo's perfect smile finally, momentarily, curled at the edges. His patience had run out. Such a disappointment, Doctor. I really did think you were smarter than my brother. He reached a hand toward his jacket pocket, a slow, deliberate movement. A shadow moved quickly behind him. It came from a fire exit door that opened silently into the corridor. It was one of Luca's men, an older soldier with a scarred face and shoulders like slabs of rock, a man Luca called Silvio, one of the oldest and most loyal of his original guard. A jolt of relief shot through me. We were saved. Silvio was here to neutralize Enzo and secure the file. Silvio stepped up to Enzo's side. He wasn't looking at me or Luca's brother. He was looking at the ground. His face was a mask of conflict, loyalty fighting fear, old debts battling new power. I watched, holding my breath, as Silvio raised his right hand. He didn't draw a weapon on Enzo. Instead, Silvio placed his hand firmly on Enzo's shoulder, a gesture of ownership and allegiance. He bowed his head slightly. The message was clear. He was taking Enzo's side.
Silvio's betrayal was a sickening twist, not just for me, but for the entire code Luca lived by. It was the moment the old world died, replaced by Enzo's corporate efficiency. Silvio stood there, a rock of muscle and a man of old oaths, now aligned with the future of greed. He was shaking, not with fear of us, but with the agony of a loyalty fighting a new, terrifying power. "Take them," Enzo commanded, his voice sharp with finality, "and bring the boy. We'll finish this where the view is better." We were herded through the service corridors, up flights of emergency stairs, and onto the rooftop garden. The night air hit us, sharp with fresh rain and the dense, herbal scent of rosemary planted in sleek concrete boxes. The city glittered below, an infinite mosaic of light, beautiful, cold, and utterly breakable. Matteo, who had been waiting in a secure corner of the hospital lobby, was brought up by two of Enzo's waiting security men. He ran straight to me, clutching my coat. His small, fearful presence magnified the stakes of the moment by 1,000. Luca arrived last, escorted by Silvio. His suit was dark, his eyes were darker, but his hands were open, relaxed at his sides. A deceptive posture of surrender. "You brought us to the rooftop for drama, Enzo?" Luca asked, his voice steady despite the gun held at his back by one of Silvio's new colleagues. "For closure, Luca," Enzo corrected, pacing the rooftop like a man who already owned the land below. "I want the family. I want the hospitals free of your messy, self-righteous debts. And most importantly, I want the story that history will tell, that I was the one who evolved, the one who brought us into the light." He was talking too much. He was savoring the victory, turning the moment into a speech. That was his weakness, the need for validation. Enzo pointed a crisp, manicured finger at the file in my hand. "Hand over the documents, Elena, and you and the boy walk away, unharmed. You take your life back. You get your name cleared." I held the file tighter. "You won't clear my name. You'll just bury it deeper in your narrative." "It's the best you'll get," Enzo snapped, his voice losing its polish. "Take it."
Luca stepped forward, his eyes locked on his brother's. He didn't look at me or Matteo. He looked at the vast, uncaring city. "Stop it, Enzo," Luca said, his voice flat. "This ends now. They go free, they walk down the stairs, they drive away, and they are never touched. You give me your word." Enzo laughed, a dry, high sound that grated against the rain. "And what do I get, brother? You? You're worthless to me now, a discredited liability." "You get the family," Luca stated simply. The resources, the contacts, the silent infrastructure you need to be the king you think you are. And you get my silence. I'll take the fall. I'll walk away and never come back. I trade myself for them. It was a final, devastating act of self-sacrifice. He was trading an entire criminal empire for 2 lives, one of which he barely knew. He was choosing penance over power. Enzo considered it, the calculating gears grinding behind his eyes. It was a clean, easy win. He got the power without the messy assassination, the empire without the ongoing war. Done, Enzo declared, pulling a black satin handkerchief from his pocket and dabbing a single bead of rain from his cheek. Silvio, escort the doctor and the boy to the service exit. Don't touch them. Then, come back. The wind gusted hard, sending a spray of cold rain across the rooftop. Rain beaded on my eyelashes. I stepped toward Luca, wanting to touch him, to tell him no, that the price was too high. Luca's eyes silently commanded me to leave. He took a single, deep breath and said one word, not loudly, but with devastating finality, looking at his brother. Enough. It was a word of surrender, but also of absolute, uncompromising control. Silvio turned, his face pale and sick with the conflict raging inside him. He had his gun out, pointed at the concrete. He was supposed to escort us. The soldier hesitated for one terrible second, his loyalty fighting the decades of protection Luca had provided, fighting the terror of Enzo's new, cold world. The loyalty won. The truth of the moment, Luca's selfless surrender, had broken the spell. The soldier, Silvio, turned his gun, not at Luca, not at me, but toward Enzo Vitali. The gunshot was a thunderclap on the open rooftop, a sound that swallowed the city's hum whole. It wasn't a clean, cinematic shot. It was a desperate explosion of a man pushed past his breaking point. Enzo staggered, more shocked than seriously wounded. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, a clear, deliberate warning shot by a man who knew how to kill, but chose not to. The other men, Enzo's newly paid security, froze. Silvio's shot was a seismic breach in the spell of cold control that Enzo had kept them all under. The hierarchy was broken. And then, the sound of the world returning. Sirens. Not a distant wail, but a rapid, growing chorus rising from the street below. Real police this time, not the escorts. They were converging on St. Jude's, their lights flashing blue and red through the mist. They had been tipped off, not by me, but by Sarah, the nurse, who had found her courage and made the final, anonymous call. Luca stepped forward. He didn't take the gun from Silvio. He didn't even look at his fallen brother. He stepped into the light, toward the edge of the rooftop, where the glare from the growing bank of news helicopters was already washing the scene. He did the hardest thing a man like him could do. He named the crimes, in front of the cameras, the shocked donors, and the converging police. He spoke clearly, confessing his own complicity, but detailing Enzo's recent maneuvers and the deep corruption of the St. Jude's board. He then looked at me. I walked to him, and in front of everyone, I handed him the manila file, the original signatures, the clean kill. Luca presented the folder to the first uniformed officer who reached the roof. "This is the true charter of St. Jude's," he said, his voice ringing with a strange, exhausting honesty. "The hospital is sick. This is the evidence to cut out the rot and save the body." The board folded by morning. The chairman was arrested attempting to flee. The hospital, facing total collapse, cut out its cancerous leadership, choosing to build a new council focused on a code that protected the weak first. The Vitali family did not crown a king. It fractured, but it did not fall. It chose to build a future around accountability, led by the one brother who finally chose to sacrifice everything. Hours later, the river was quiet under a gray, bruised dawn. I sat on Luca's balcony. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and cold. Mateo was asleep, draped against my side, his breath warm and steady. He was exhausted but safe. My phone, lying beside a mug of fresh coffee, displayed a single text message. Your badge has been formally reinstated, effective immediately. We apologize for the error. The investigation is closed. The apology would never be enough to cover the 2 years they took from me, but it was a start. I held the letter with clean hands. Inside, the grand piano waited. 2 keys were still broken from the struggle, but the instrument was silent now, promising a new song that had yet to be written. Luca stood a step away from me, close enough that I felt the lingering heat and the smoke that would always cling to his suits and his past. Far enough that he did not make this choice for me. He looked tired and strangely lighter, like a man who finally put down a weight he thought was his forever. I thought about what I had lost, the simple certainty of right and wrong, the clean lines of my old life, and what I had found, truth with teeth, loyalty that bled for a better cause, and a love that didn't ask to be easy. The city hummed under us, vast and complicated. Somewhere in the distance, a train rolled on time, carrying strangers to mornings that didn't know our names. I breathed in the clean, wet air, the faint, clear citrus of my own perfume, the deep, smoky scent of his presence. I did not run. The night was finally quiet, but my heart, knowing the fight had just begun, wasn't. You've seen the fire, the betrayal, and the moment a life's work hung on the twist of a single knife. But the real story isn't about the fight on the rooftop, it's about the war in the city and the choices we make every morning. If you believe that the darkest corners hold the deepest truths, and you're ready to see what Alana does with her reinstated badge and her new dangerous ally, then don't let the silence swallow this story. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're just getting started, and you don't want to miss the next battle for this city.